dangerous, large carnivore out there.
And I saw that bird pick a young deer off the road and fly away.
And it was just about getting dark, and we started panicking, running down this ridge, not really having any clue what was throwing rocks in our vicinity, good-sized rocks. And I stopped long enough to get a 357 out of my backpack and look back, and that's when I saw it. I saw one.
For a week, the town's defiance was being harassed by a werewolf. And it's actually attacked two railroad workers, killed livestock, just a lot of weird stuff that was going on.
Well, folks, welcome to Monster X Radio. Monster X Radio is, of course, brought to you by Sasquatch Coffee. Have you tried it, Yeti? You can purchase Sasquatch Coffee at www.squatchcoffee.com, and you can also find Sasquatch Coffee on Facebook. Give them a like. And tonight we're doing the another Encounters episode. We always enjoy those, and we know the folks out there do as well. It's always nice to hear the reports from out in the wilds from different folk around the country. My name is Shane Corson, and my co-host, special co-host for this evening, is Julie Rench. Julie, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
How are you?
Julie, while we wait for our guests to join us, I was going to mention, you recently sent some hair to Cindy Dosen that you found in Ohio. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, sure. A few weeks ago, we were in one of our areas where the landowner believes he has seen a large bipedal, about 8-foot-tall creature 3 times since probably 2009 to currently. So we've been invited to go out there and do some investigating. And I was looking at the barb on this barbed wire fence, and in one barb out of 250 feet of barbed wire, there was this unusual hair that I was not familiar with. I'm pretty familiar with most of the game animals and animals in this area. So I sent them up to Cindy Dosen there in British Columbia, and she sent them back the analysis back, and they were actually bobcat hair. And that was really interesting because back in 1850, bobcats in Ohio were just about extinct. They settled here and pretty much killed them all off. And there hasn't been a verified documented case of a bobcat. Some people thought they may have seen them over the years, but they've never been able to document or verify since 1850 in this county.
Yeah, see, what's exciting from my perspective on that is your thoroughness with checking out what this hair was. You weren't ever claiming to be Sasquatch hair, but you had no idea what this hair was. And sending to Cindy Dosen, and she, of course, came back and gave you the update.
Right.
And that to me is real research. That's solid research, and not even disappointing. Actually, pretty exciting because of the nature.
Yeah, because the landowner had no idea really that there was bobcats out there. So And the thing is, his neighbor has a free-range chicken farm, and he had just been saying, like 2 weeks before that his chickens are suddenly coming up missing. So I think we might have the culprit.
That could be. That's a very high possibility. I know you've placed some trail cams out in this area.
Yeah.
So maybe getting, and I think you will. You leave them out there long enough at the right height in the right area. Cats are creatures of habit,
right?
And you will get pictures. I know you contacted the wildlife department, correct?
Yes, I did, and they told me they haven't had a verified case of a bobcat in this county since they started keeping track. I believe it was like 1970, because they were they were endangered, and in 2014 they were taken off the endangered list and put on the protective species list, and so they're still protected in Ohio. They're just not verified in this area, but it appears that they're starting to make a comeback, even on this side of Ohio now.
Yeah, I got you, and that's well, that says a lot. I mean, here we have something we already know to exist, and yet the evidence in this area, it's pretty scarce. You don't have any trail cam pictures. Of a bobcat in this area.
Exactly.
Hello. Mm-hmm.
Yep, they don't have any reports of that. If someone did get a picture at some time, they've never reported it, but I can't imagine that, they wouldn't, because that's a heck of a find, so. And I haven't heard of one around here, and I've been here for 40 years, so.
Yeah. Hopefully down the road here you'll be able to pull out some pictures and maybe even find some tracks. I would imagine down the road you might be able to find some tracks, and kind of, it's really nice to figure out what you're dealing with out in these areas, and to come across a discovery like this. That's really cool. Anything, I know there's other groups around the country that have done similar things with their research and discovered, I think a group out of Northern California, the martin, I think they had on the trail cam, and that was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Signature Hertz group. Yeah.
The Bluff Creek Project. Yeah, they do good work.
Bluff Creek Project. Yeah. So it's always exciting to discover what's unknown out there, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily involved around the subject of Sasquatch. It's just part of the pursuit and part of the knowledge.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So
we're still waiting on our guests. Still waiting on our guests to join us. So until they do, I will continue on. I was out this past weekend again, doing my thing, and really quite weekend out, doing the audio trail cam thing. But I was going to say it's very important. A lot of people expect when they go out to the woods to always have something strange happen, or have a Sasquatch encounter, or what have you. And for me, it's rare. There's possibilities there, sure, but it's rare. I think it's just as important when you're out in the woods doing research, that when you do not have an encounter, to document that stuff, because you really gain a feel for what's going on out there all the time, rather than just picking what you would consider a hot time to be out. Do you agree, Julie?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. It could be like this type of research can be so boring at times, I guess. Not for me. I just love being out in the outdoors. I sleep the best when I'm on the ground in my tent, or just in nature, and to get a chance to be out there, and I get a lot of chance. I'm out there a lot, and that makes it very exciting, and the possibilities are always there for possibilities. But we got to, I think, get to a place where, as researchers and groups, and a lot of them are there, but to get to a point where to document this stuff, and not worry about having those encounters, or always finding evidence, document everything all times a year, and see where you end up. But here we go. I believe our guest is with us now, so I'm going to bring them on and quit rambling.
Awesome.
Hello, Jeffrey Szymecki. Is that you?
Yes, this is me.
Welcome
Hey.
to Monster X. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeffrey. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thank you for having me on and inviting me to discuss this with you.
Absolutely. It's I'm not familiar with you, Jeffrey. I'm not familiar with your encounters. So, do you mind telling the audience just a little bit about yourself and if you had any before you had any of these encounters, were you interested in Bigfoot?
No, because I had my first encounter when I was like for the summer vacation between first and second grade, and that would have been like 1967 and 1968, and there wasn't really too much about Bigfoot going on then on television. So my first encounter was the first encounter I had with Bigfoot. Period.
Oh, wow, that's pretty rare. A lot of the people I talk to, they kind of had an interest, or they had a lot more awareness of the subject. But to have this, I mean, what went through your mind during this first encounter? I mean, what was going on there? I mean, you're a young guy.
Well, I was picking blackberries with my Aunt Jo and my cousin Jimmy, about probably, I'd say no more than a mile from our farm, and there was this hayfield that the Muncie family had. And in the middle of the hayfield, well, it wasn't always a hayfield. One year it'd be hay, a couple years later it'd be wheat and corn. You have crop rotation so you don't damage the soil. But through the years, they always stacked their rocks and small boulders in the center of the field. And that they got a lot of sunlight there. For whatever reason, the blackberries really, really like growing out of the rocks over there from that area. So we were over there, we were picking up berries, filling our buckets, and this berry patch ran north to south. And the time of day we were picking our berries was right after supper, and the sun was just starting to go down because it was like beginning of June, where it stays daylight here till almost like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And the sun had just started to go down over the peaks, but it was still daylight, and had a nice purple glow going, and we were picking berries, and the next thing we knew, there's this big, tall thing that stood up, and my cousin Jimmy started screaming, "Monkey man, monkey man." My Aunt Jo said, "Jimmy, Jeffrey, let's go to the car," and we ran to the car. I remember looking at it. It probably had to have been, let's say, 6 to 6.5 foot tall. It's black, covered in black hair, and had like a light brown to a dark tan face. We got in the old Malibu, and we beat feet back to the farm, and that was it for that night.
Wow. I mean, so, yeah, wow. So, Monkey Man, is that how you would have described what you saw?
Yeah, that's how I would have described it. That the whole time I looked at it, it had to have been less than 10 seconds. So I was like, we were picking berries. Next thing you know, it stood up. My aunt screamed. I looked over. There it was, and we all started running towards the car.
Gotcha. And I mean, how close were you at the time to this Monkey Man?
I'd probably say no less than 8 feet.
Wow, that's really close. Julie, you had a question?
Yeah. Could you tell us the county? And that's in Pennsylvania, right?
Yes, this would be Erie County, Pennsylvania.
Erie County. Okay, thank you.
And this happened in between Wattsburg and Arbuckle.
Okay.
What time of year did this occur? Obviously, it's berry season.
Summer, right in June,
summer.
Early June.
Okay. What was its demeanor? I mean, it stood up. So was it? Do you think it was caught off by surprise, or it finally just? I mean, that's really close. It had to have known you were there.
Truthfully, I think we surprised him as much as he surprised us. I think
I would assume that
were, eating some berries, and we were there picking some berries, and he stood up to get a better look at what was making noise in his area, and we saw him, and we just got out of there.
Mm-hmm. How tall were the bushes in this area, if you don't mind me asking? I mean, I would imagine, you're there, you can't see anything, it stands up, and then bam.
I'd say from, let's say, just below waist high to chest high on an adult, being lower towards the outside edges of the berry patch and taller towards the inside of the berry patch.
And this is the height,
and
I would imagine.
inside the berry patch, there'd be some small sumacs, maybe like 5 foot tall.
Gotcha. Can you describe what you saw exactly? I mean, hair-wise, any physical attributes that this thing had?
It was, like I said, about 6 to 6.5 foot tall. Had an athletic build, like a basketball player, baseball player, swimmer kind of build. His hair was, his body was totally hair covered. I couldn't see any skin through the hair, except for like its hands and its face I could see. Mm-hmm. And the hair length on it was probably like the length of a German Shepherd, maybe a little bit longer than a German Shepherd, maybe a Husky.
Which is pretty prevalent when when the length of hair is described. You know, I mean, was this any idea if it was male, female? I mean, do you get the impression that it was an adult or a juvenile?
Looking back on it now, I'd say it was probably a young adult, a juvenile male.
Mm-hmm. And the physical build, buildup of this thing, was it? Did you see muscle definition at all?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can see muscle underneath the hair. It was defined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about I'm going to give you some of the usual questions. Did you see a neck, ears? Can you describe the face at all?
Face was there wasn't much of a cone to its head. The ones around here that I've seen haven't had very much of a conical head. It's either very slight conical or round on the heads. And I remember that. I really don't remember seeing ears on it. Mm-hmm. And had a very, very short neck. You know what I mean? Very short neck, big shoulder muscles.
Yeah. What about the eyes? Eyes or nose? Anything there that stood out to you?
The eyes I remember being very, very dark brown.
Which is once again typical with Sasquatch reports. Anything about the mouth or the? Was the mouth wide? Was it short?
It had a wider mouth, but it was closed. He didn't have it open at all. You could see no teeth or not anything. It was there. You know what I mean? I just saw his lips.
Mm-hmm.
No teeth.
Yeah. In the face, a lot of reports, from witnesses that are reported is that there's a lack of hair on the face, but around the edges there's hair. Similar to what you saw?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was pretty
Do you
much
ever get the impression
until it got around like where the back of the mouth would be. Then he started to get some hair there. It went from bare skin to sparse hair to hair. This
is your initial sighting. Did you get what was your impression? You said monkey man. Does that describe it looking back now accurately? Or, did you get the impression that this thing was more human-like or more ape-like, based on what a lot of people describe? It differs.
It was ape-looking but more human-looking on the ape side,
mm-hmm.
It didn't have a build had more of a build like a very muscular human. Had the face, it was an ape-like face, but it had a very lot of human qualities to it from what I remember. I wasn't really afraid of it. I was surprised,
Mm-hmm.
I actually wanted to stay and look at it a little bit, put my hand, it basically yelled for us to go to the car, so I ran to the car with it.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, do you recall, Jeffrey, the eyes? There wasn't any part of the eyes that were white. It was dark brown.
I just remember seeing eyes that dark brown. I didn't see any white. Didn't see any yellow or anything like that.
Okay.
Kind of like a deer eye or a cow eye would be,
Okay.
Like that.
Yeah, and you guys get in the car and you guys just took off, and that was that.
Right.
Did you guys talk about? Your aunt, did she have anything to say on the ride home or what?
Not too much. We got in the house. We all sat at the table for a little bit, and, Uncle Lawrence came out, and we talked about it a little bit, and then his older brother Chucky came out. We talked about it a little bit, and then Lawrence was saying, it's the monkey man. You know what I mean? Things like that.
Yeah.
Because that area has a history of it, and the older people call it the howler, the breather, the swamper. the walker, the watchers, things like that, because that Northwest Pennsylvania has a history of that.
Yeah, it has a long history of that. And I was going to ask you as well, I mean, this area that you guys were picking the berries, how remote was this area? Was it super remote? How far off the road? And what is in the surrounding areas? I mean, do you have bodies of water, a lot of...
Well, back then, the neighbors, right now it's kind of getting suburbanized. I really hate to say that because I hate seeing, farmland go to a bunch of subdivisions and 5,000 square foot homes. I hate that. Mm-hmm. But back then, there was like maybe our closest neighbor was a quarter mile away, with our average neighbor being a half a mile to a mile away back then. And where this sighting happened at, it's Erie County, Pennsylvania, eastern Erie County. It's very close to the New York border, and that area goes from rolling hills in Pennsylvania where it starts to go into the Allegheny Mountains. And Allegheny Mountains, they're not really big mountains like you find out west or in the Carolinas, but they are big mountains. And that's that area of Wattsburg. And French Creek starts in New York State in that area. It's a very, very small creek, and by the time it winds through Wattsburg, it gets to be about 20 foot wide, 4 to 10 foot deep in certain areas. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, of little feeders, streams, and brooks that flow into this. And also in that area, there's a lot of swamps, a lot of marshes, and some beaver dams. So there's a lot of fresh water around. There's a lot of cover. A lot of the swamps are beech and hemlock swamps, and some of the swamps have the red branch. I don't know what you call it, but it's like very thick red branch, and they don't get very tall, maybe about 8 foot tall. That it could take you easily, let's say, 10 minutes to a half hour to go 100 yards when you're hunting.
Mm-hmm. So back to the subject, to what you saw, the monkey man. One of the questions in our chat room from one of our listeners is, can you, what was the ratio of the arm to leg length? I mean, did you see long arms, short arms, thick arms?
I really didn't see too much arm. I saw the hand on one side, but the rest of the body was by the berry bushes. So I honestly can't say how long the arm hung down on that particular
It never
animal.
raised its hands up at all at you, like,
no,
above its head?
No, not at all. His hands were just at his side,
Yeah.
The whole time.
Yeah, and its demeanor, like you said, from what you're describing, seemed, it stood up. So, obviously it knew it was going to be seen, and was maybe inquisitive or surprised that you were there, and you guys took
like
off.
I was telling you, I think we surprised him as much as he surprised us, because we were probably there from the time we walked from the car to that little rock pile with the berry bushes on it and started filling our buckets. Maybe 5 minutes had passed. We weren't there that long.
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of berries, though. Sounds like you had great reason to be there.
We went back the next day to pick our buckets up.
Oh, wow. So you guys weren't you guys didn't feel too threatened that you guys obviously went back there.
Right.
Yeah. Did you look for any evidence at that time?
No, I was, like I said, I was like 7, 8 years old at that time, and that was the last thing on my mind. Back then, the thing that was on my mind was my bicycle and my BB gun. That was about it, and fishing.
Of course. 11-year-old. What about, this initial encounter, did you smell anything, and do you remember the direction of the wind? Was there any smell, anything, where was the wind blowing?
I remember that night there wasn't really a breeze that night. It was just cool. It was still and cool. I remember that, and we didn't smell anything. Nothing but the normal farmland smells, like some manure coming from somewhere, but that's about it. We smelled nothing out of the ordinary.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so, very interesting stuff. Now, you had this initial encounter, but you subsequently had others, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and I got to ask you, are some of these other encounters, were they in the same general vicinity? And also,
yes, there was another one later that summer, probably about, I'd say no less than a month later. And it was fairly close to where the berry patch incident happened. I would say it happened in a woodlot by the barn, and this woodlot was, if you look at it towards the barn, the woodlot's probably a quarter mile long by about no more than 50 to 75 yards wide at the widest point on it. It's mostly older trees. And all the older trees are about 40 foot apart. You had some smaller trees, and the place was loaded with May-apples and grapevines hanging down from the trees. We used to play Tarzan, Cowboys and Indians, and Army back there all the time. And we were playing in the woods, and when you grow up in the farm country, you're taught to tell time by the clock. Not the clock, but the sun, and the sun was down a certain part in the sky, and that's time for us to go back and start doing chores. So we started heading back. We cut across the woodlot, and there we had a small cornfield that was next to it that would have been like knee-high to waist-high on an adult, the corn. We started walking through the corn, and Jimmy's brother, Chucky, was at the back door of the barn, and he got a wide-eyed look on his face and yelled for us to run towards the barn as fast as we can and don't look back. Well, Jimmy and I looked up to Chucky, and we just ran there, did what he said, and we didn't look back. When we got to the barn, he told us to go in the milk house and get the cider underneath the cooler. And the whole time, Chucky had a barn gun in his hand and was watching us go, and about 30 seconds later, he collected us up and walked us to the house. And that incident there, Chucky saw what was chasing Jimmy and I, but Jimmy and I, we didn't see what was chasing us because he told us to run towards the barn and not look back.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you obviously didn't see what the commotion was all about, but you knew to listen and adhere to the advice, and you guys got out of there.
Right.
Did he mention later what was going on?
Yep, told us it was the monkey man again.
Monkey man. Monkey man again. And this is in pretty close proximity to your original sighting?
Yes, from where, if you took a line and drew it from the barn and had a straight line going to it, it'd probably be like a quarter mile away.
So chances are it may very well have been the same individual, I would imagine.
I assume so.
Yeah. Did he give you a description? He said monkey man, but I mean, what was his impression? And then how was this thing acting? Was it acting differently, or just happened to see it?
It was just, from what he said, it was following us.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't trying to catch up to us, but it was just following us. And
wow,
we were
that's
about,
maybe, yeah.
And we were probably about, let's say, 100 yards or less from the barn when he told us to start running up towards the barn.
Gotcha. I understand. So I mean, that ended. Was there talk afterwards? With the aunt or anything with your aunt? I mean, about this. I mean, now you have. So what I'm getting at is, you probably were out in the woods picking berries many years. This wasn't your first time out picking berries with your original encounter, correct? And then now you have these two sightings within close proximity and time in this area. It's kind of uncanny.
Yes, it is. And all that summer, there was a lot of howling going on around a lot of the farms, like coming from the tree lines or from behind the barns, close to the barns. And this howl, I only heard it one time. It sounded like a cross between a woman screaming and a dog howling.
Were now you're talking about this area?
Yeah.
Were any of the you didn't have neighbors super close by at this time, but I mean, were the neighbors mentioning to you or any friends? I mean, were you guys talking about this with anybody, or was this kind of like hush hush?
We were talking with other kids in the neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
our friends and everything.
Did they have any similar experiences?
Jimmy and I were basically the ones that saw it, and some of the adults saw it,
Mm-hmm.
And
but
what's that?
Yeah, I was going to say, in this, you're talking about a relatively small area as far as the amount of people. It's interesting that this thing, if it was the same individual or subject, it was kind of hanging around, and you're talking about sounds now and two sightings. that to me is interesting. What was it doing there? Why was it there? And for how long was it there?
Well, if you went on a map and you put a pinpoint in the area where Muncie's farm was and went on a 5-mile scale and drew a 5-mile radius, that's where everything was happening at.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What was the closest water source? You know, I mean, were you guys? This is Ohio, of course. A lot of water. What was the closest water source?
The water sources were everywhere, man.
Mm-hmm.
You have the main branch of French Creek that runs right down through there, which is probably about no more than a quarter to a half a mile away. Then you have all kinds of little feeder streams that are all over and dotted through that area. Plus, there's farm ponds and there's springs in that area. So the water is no problem in that area.
Yeah. So you got a water source. You have berries, and I'm sure you have other ungulates and animals in this area.
You have cornfields. You had peach orchards, apple orchards, pear orchards, all through that area.
No reason something couldn't be in this area for an extended period of time, and I guess stay undetected. It had plenty of places to forage and roam and stay hidden if it so wanted to.
Right. Like I was telling you about some of the swamps, it'd take you, say, 15 minutes to a half hour to go 100 yards. By the time you do that, they'd be gone, or you're not even going to go in that. A lot of the older people, like the great-grandparents, would tell us to stay away from certain areas of the woods, tell us to stay away from certain swamps, certain creek areas, the flats around some of the creek areas, and stay in the woodlots and close to the barns and the machinery sheds where we could be under adult supervision.
Yeah, and Jeffrey, you and I had talked about that before. Was it your grandmother or your aunt that called them the cat people?
That was my friend's great-grandmother.
Your friend's and was she referring to these things, you think, or was she?
I'm not too sure, Julie. I think she was. I think that's what she called them.
Okay.
Like we talked about before, I agree with you. I think she saw something back in her younger days that stuck with her mind like that, and she was adamant about us that when that stuff started happening, just for us to stay close to the barns and close to the houses.
Okay, and she lived how far from you guys?
She lived with the Muncie family. So she lived right there.
Okay. That's interesting.
Well, it's really interesting that you mentioned cat people because that is a name that's been tossed around in different parts of the country, and I always wonder. Okay, I understand why you called it a monkey man. Now, why do people call it? Maybe it's two separate things. I don't know, but a lot of these Bigfoot reports from back, not so much recently, but back in the day, they called it, cat man, or had some sort of cat-like attributes. And when I look at a cat, what are the things that stick out to me? Ears, eyes. So specifically the eyes, and so and Sasquatch is reported to be very stealthy and whatnot. So you're talking about it's maneuvering around. Did your relative, your grandma, did she see something? What was that? That's interesting. But yet she also had this. She wanted you to stay safe, and she wanted you to stay out of certain areas.
Exactly. Well, all the older people did. They told us to stay away from certain areas.
So when was your next encounter?
Our next encounter that I had was after my dad married my stepmom. We leased a 500-acre farm at a place called Lavery's Corners, which is basically right in between Edinburgh and Albion, PA, on Route 6N with an intersection at 98. And my brother Larry and I were watching championship wrestling one night. It was just after Christmas, after New Year's, that holiday, right after the holidays. And there was a really bad winter. That winter, I remember that. And Larry and I went to the kitchen to get some more popcorn during the commercial. And in the kitchen, we had a small picture window. And Larry and I were looking at the blizzard throughout the picture window. Then we saw looking at us about 40 feet away from the house, something that was hair covered in snow, and about I'd say about 6.5 to 7 foot tall, just looking at us, kind of glaring at us. And Larry and I just threw our bowls on the counter, ran out here in the living room and told Dad, there's something out there. You got to come look at it. My dad said, shut up. He was watching wrestling. So, and about after wrestling, Larry and I went outside, got our snowmobile suits on, went outside to where this thing was. But by that time, it was a blizzard that night. By the time we got out there were no tracks to be found anywhere. And that encounter lasted probably all of about, I'd say, less than 7 seconds.
Yeah, real short encounter. Now, how old were you when you saw this during this third encounter?
About 10.
About 10?
Yes.
Okay. When you originally had your first encounter, how old were you then?
I was 7 or 8. That was, like I said, that was a summer vacation in between first and second grade.
Okay. So, and it's you're at the same house. You didn't move or anything. It's the same area.
Well, no, we moved. We moved to about probably, I'd say, 20 miles away from that area. And this was at a place, like I said, Lavers Corners. It's right in between Edinburgh and Albion, Pennsylvania. And another thing, too, it's probably about 3 miles north of the Crawford County line. I was just waiting for a question.
Oh, so that was the third time that's okay. That's the third time that you saw something. And you've had a total of about 7 times that you've seen something that resembled what we would describe as a Bigfoot. So most of them were like brief few seconds of seeing the creature, if you will. And then how old were you the next time that you saw one?
Well, I was probably next time I saw him, that's probably after I got out of the Navy in 1981. But in between that time there, Larry and I used to do a lot of camping down by the beaver dams, and we used to hear breathing and walking through the woods at night.
Really?
Yes.
Were you guys scared?
We were creeped out, but needless to say, we kind of got used to it.
Okay.
All we would do was just throw more wood on the fire.
Right. One of the questions that I know that a lot of listeners, will be asking their head, and this is not an attack or whatsoever, just a pure question, in the fact that Sasquatch encounters are rare. Why do you think you've had the opportunity to possibly witness and visualize, see in person, possible, a Sasquatch?
I think it's just the areas where we lived at and areas where I've hunted and fished at. Truthfully, that's all I can think. There's other people who had encounters in those areas also. It's not just me.
No, absolutely. No, like I said, that Pennsylvania is pretty well known for a lot of Sasquatch reports and encounters. But I just had to ask you that because a lot of people.
Well, to that end, up until the time that I got married and became a father and everything, I used to spend hundreds and hundreds of hours out in the woods a year. I was always in the woods, hunting, fishing, scouting for game, camping. I was always out there. And I think that's the key. You have to, if you're trying to find one, if you're trying to see one, you're trying to find sign of one, you have to get off your ass and get out in the woods. You're not going to find them driving around. You're not going to try them you're just not going to find them sitting on a computer trying to learn as much as you can. That's fine and good for getting some ideas, but if you want to learn, get out in the woods, get out in the fields, get by the streams, look in the swamps. You have to. It's like I said, I was a hunter and a fisherman, and I've seen had all mine encounters either hunting or scouting for game.
And you weren't looking for them.
No, I was never looking for them at any given time in my life. I just dumb luck. I stumbled across them, or they stumbled across me.
Right. And that seems to be a lot of people who have had an encounter weren't really looking for them. They, happen to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like you, sir, were in the right place at the right time for these encounters. One of the things that I wanted to mention was with your initial encounter, berries. A lot of reports and a lot of some of the circumstantial evidence that I've come across over the years has involved berries, berry bushes, and whatnot. The significance there, I think, is rather obvious. It's a food source, So, how has this area? Do you think that Sasquatch is still in these areas out there? How has it changed? You mentioned a little bit earlier, but how have these areas changed? Is there a chance Sasquatch is still in those counties?
Yes, I do believe that they're in Erie County, and I actually think there's a lot more than people would think could be up here, because I think they're going into the thicker areas around, like, the railroad tracks and the Erie Beaver Barge canal beds. I think they're heading deeper towards the swamps, the thicker areas. And there's even reports of them having been seen and signs of them in the suburban areas of Girard and Fairview Township here in Erie County.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Where does this put you? Do you go out and are you now looking for Sasquatch, or you? What are your thoughts? Are you afraid of Sasquatch?
Oh yeah, I don't trust the thing. I don't want to see him ever again. But I'm teaching a younger friend of mine on what to look for and signs of them and things like that. I still get out in the woods. There's certain places I don't like to go to alone, and there's certain places I won't step foot in at all.
Mm-hmm.
And these
what about
places
reports?
that I won't. What's that?
No, go ahead.
And these places that I won't step in foot at all, it's mainly because if something happened, you're not going to get out of there very fast,
Right.
But what's sad about that to me is that's where you find the biggest deer, and that's where you find the deer that are hiding during the deer seasons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about reports from, you're obviously older than, now. Have you heard of anybody else? We know there are reports from these areas, but do you know anybody personally that's had encounters in these areas that have shared them with you?
Yes. Different fishermen.
And were they similar to yours?
Or? Yes and no. The property owner that I check out his property for him every now and then, they have their encounters and their things start happening right around the middle of September up until the beginning of November. And what's unique about that is that's when a lot of the apples and a lot of the fruits are ready for harvest. That's when a lot of grain's ready for harvest. And that's when the steelhead and the coho salmon start running from Lake Erie up the tributary streams to spawn. And they'll run anywhere from quarter mile upstream all the way about, let's say, 7 to 10 miles upstream in certain areas. And that's where they have the encounters at in the fall.
Mm-hmm. And what you're describing to me,
along with the fish runs, you also have turkey season that's getting ready to start. The birds are flocking up, and then you have deer season coming up around that time where the deer are in rut. So right on, that's western Erie County, and we pretty much have a full smorgasbord going on about that time.
Yeah, what you're describing to me, I'm seeing some patterns here. I think you would agree that, and once again, for obvious reasons, but you're seeing a pattern here. You got, the fruit, the possible fish, the steelhead and whatnot coming through there. If Sasquatch is going to be in this area this time of year, there's a good reason why it would be there, and a good reason why people are encountering them, because they're out there hunting and foraging and doing their thing.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. No, it makes a lot of sense. I love patterns. I love patterns. I love predictability, and that's what I'm hearing based on what you're sharing with me from Pennsylvania. I've never been to Pennsylvania, but I have friends in Pennsylvania. I know researchers out in Pennsylvania, and this is all very similar information that you've shared. So, Jeffrey, where do you think is the Sasquatch? As in research. I mean, you don't consider yourself a researcher, but where do you think the Sasquatch research is going? And what are your thoughts? Do you want this thing to be found, known, or you just don't care?
I'm in the I don't care part of it. I would prefer that it not be found. People who know, But I just don't want to see it. I really don't want to see the thing be found, because then it's going to become hunted. Whether they protect it or not, it's going to become hunted, And sometimes I've been at odds with these guys, and, I've heard stories about farmers that have killed them off and things like that, but I don't want to see that happen,
Yeah.
I
would think I think the majority of people would not want to see that happen. I will say that, there's a lot of hunters out there now. I mean, I was just out in the woods with a friend of mine, but also a guy that's been on this show before that had an encounter where he had one in its scope, and he did not pull the trigger. One, because he didn't know what it was, but there's hunters out there. I mean, they could be technically hunted right now without really, you get some careless hunter shoots one and they don't know what they're shooting at because they don't have ethics. But I guess I personally do want them to be discovered. I just don't see a mass. Even if people want to go out and hunt them, I mean, look where we're at now. We haven't even proven the existence of Sasquatch. I don't think people are going to have more luck just because it's. Yeah, that is true. It could be. I don't see it happening. But it's a possibility. I just don't see people having any luck. We're not having luck now, and there's people actually out there trying to shoot one now. So.
All right.
Yeah. But who knows? It's a valid point. I can't argue with it because it's not been proven yet. But I don't doubt its existence. I know Sasquatch is out there. What it is, I won't claim to know, but it is out there. But Jeffrey, anything else you want to share with us over the years? Any stories? Any other encounters? Any thoughts?
Well, some things that happened to me while I was hunting in the eastern Erie County. I get a lot of tree peaks out there. You'll be sitting down, something will catch you out the corner of your eye, you'll look over, and you might see like a head look towards you, and then the head goes behind a tree, and you'll get up and go take a look where it's coming from, and there's nothing there. And there's times where I had seen them like walking in the woods, and then they'll probably notice me or know that I'm there, then they put a tree in between me and them, and they're gone. Because that's all you... That's the way to hunt deer too. You see a deer in the woods, you put yourself in a tree in between you and the deer, and you can sneak right up on it. It won't see you. Mm-hmm. That's the same strategy that they use there, I believe.
Are you mostly a foot hunter? I mean, you're on foot, or do you use tree stands or anything like that?
I stalk. I'm a foot hunter. I don't believe in stands.
Mm-hmm.
Because after all, it's called hunting, not sitting.
yeah, exactly. No, I like that. But these areas. I mean, what kind of trees? I mean, if something's tree peaking, and I've witnessed this firsthand, what kind of trees are we talking about? Like how big a tree are we talking about in the state of Pennsylvania, and what kind of trees?
Well, the woods up around where I live and where I hunt are predominantly hardwood. You have maple, you have oak, you have beech, you have cherry. And, alder, you've got ash, and you've got some old-growth hemlocks, which are hemlocks kind of cross between a softwood and a hardwood. Mm-hmm. They're like a tree that was like caught in the prehistoric times just before it's still changing from like a pine tree into a tree with leaves on it. But our trees go anywhere from old-growth trees that are probably, I'd say, 80 to 100 foot tall to the average one that's probably about 40 to 60 foot tall.
Yeah, so we're talking some substance, some substantial trees. In a former life, I used to transplant trees, so I'm always curious about trees and the what kind of trees are in an area and how big they are. Especially if something like a Sasquatch peeking behind trees. You know, it's got to have, you know, we're not talking about thin trees. We're talking about, you know, somewhat substantial trees to hide behind and move to and fro from.
Uh-huh.
Well,
when was your last encounter?
My last encounter?
Yeah.
That's when I was driving to work from a girlfriend's house one Saturday morning. I can't tell you the exact month. It was just before trout season. It could have been late March or it could have been early April. And I was driving down Old State Road, and Old State Road got its name from it used to be the border between New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio at one time, and so New York gave Pennsylvania Erie County. That's how we got Erie County. And I was driving down that road. I had just left the Waterford town limits. I was heading to where it becomes rural and farmland again. I come around a slight corner, and there standing towards the middle of the road was a big, huge, giant gray Sasquatch. And this thing cleared the road in 2 steps, and it got by a road sign, which is regulation height. The height of it is 8 foot, and his head was a good 1.5 to 2 foot taller than the sign. And he crossed from north, moving south from the farmland into the swamp. He stepped down off a little levee, looked at me kind of a little bit, and then he just walked off the swamp and disappeared into the trees. And that happened at about like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Okay.
How long ago was this? I mean, this last encounter?
About 2010.
Okay.
May I suggest you carry a camera with you? Hot damn.
That's the last thing on my mind when I head into the woods is having a camera with me. I'm more about taking my day pack with me, a walking stick, and that's it right there. The camera never really was that important to me. You know, I've seen like hair in trees and hair on fences and everything, and I've looked at it and go, huh, that's weird, you know, and just keep on walking. Like research on this isn't important to me. That's not what I'm out there looking for. I'm looking for deer, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think you mimic a lot of. See, there are so many reports out there that go that are never released, never shared, because a lot of people just don't care. They have, you know, they're deer hunters, they're bear hunters, they're just hunters in general, and it's the last thing on their mind. You know, they don't care to film their kill, what they're after. They're just out trying to get some meat on the table and hunt what they're hunting. And I think that's a very important point to make. Why some of this stuff, some of the, say like hair, for example, like you just described. To me, I would, you know, as an investigator of the subject, you know, I'm going to nab that hair. But to a hunter, they're like, it's interesting. I don't care. I'm going hunting.
It's going to clutter up my bag. You know, that's all you think about, you know.
Right.
Yeah, and you're going to make yourself known. You're going in stealthy. You know, you're not trying to make yourself known to your prey. So it's a very interesting point. I think it's a very interesting point as to why we don't get a whole lot more out of, you know, hunters specifically. I mean, hunters are out there, you know, sometimes more than most. And I know a lot of hunters that have extraordinary stories, but they just, you know, they're hunters and they're not researchers. They don't care to prove anything or whatnot. And so there you go.
Right.
Well, that's the way I feel about it. It doesn't. I could care less about finding one. Like I said, I go out in the woods to hunt, camp, or fish. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jeffrey, did you say the last one you saw was gray?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Julie, maybe you have some thoughts on that for the state of, you know, well, actually Ohio. You have, you know, some reports out of Ohio. I don't know about gray, but white.
Right, and I believe where Jeffrey's out over there in Pennsylvania, you've had several reports of white ones, if I remember right. You know,
yes,
from reading up on. Yeah.
There's a
I think you guys
named
have
Brian
more.
Speech there's a researcher named Brian Speech that's been tracking one from southern Erie County down to like northern Lawrence County, and that's probably about a good 120-mile stretch. And again, that follows the French Creek Valley Basin and into the Allegheny River Basin. And like where I've seen far from Ohio, I mean, like it borders it. And I had my creepiest encounter on the Ohio border at the game lands, the Pennsylvania game lands, number 314. Haven't been back there since that happened.
Well, can you briefly tell us what happened with that?
Yes, it was the winter of 1992. My father had passed away in the summer. It was my first deer season hunt without my dad. And my dad and I, we talked for a lot about like going out with old single-shot shotguns and hunting deer like his brother used to do back during the Depression days. So I went and bought one, and I was going out to the game lands on 314 because it's a good hunting area for a lot of the reasons that I mentioned to you before. And I get out of my car, I get geared up, I start heading into the woods, and once I get in the woods, probably about 200 yards, I see movement to the front of me, going in between the trees, and it looks to be a Sasquatch in between about 6 to 7 foot tall. I estimate that from some of the branches that I got by after watching this thing. And after walking a while, I noticed movement on my right-hand side. There was another one that was shadowing me on my right-hand side. And I wanted to hunt my way from the parking lot down to the lake, which is probably close to, I'd say close to a half mile to a mile, give or take, a little bit there. And I was about halfway there, and that's when I saw the one trailing me on my right-hand side, and I just stopped because it didn't feel right. I stood there a couple minutes, collected my wits about me, and I decided instead of trying to get back there fast, I was just going to slow hunt my way back. And I slow hunted my way back to the parking lot, and the whole time, the one that was behind me, in front of me, was now behind me going from tree to tree, and the one that was on my left, and I changed sides, my right, he was on my left now, he was going from tree to tree. And they shadowed me all the way from the woods up until about 50 yards away from the parking lot.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about feeling uncomfortable, that was a very uncomfortable feeling.
I would say. Wow.
And that happened close to 30 years ago, and I haven't been back to that place since. And other guys that I know have had similar encounters there also.
Wow. Yeah. Well, you've had quite the amount of extraordinary encounters that a lot of people wish for or don't wish for, depending on what you're looking for or not looking for. And so, Jeffrey, extraordinary. Pennsylvania is, like we talked about before, has been historically a hotspot for reports, and stands to reason given the terrain, given the abundance of natural resources. Down the road, I don't know. I know there's a ton of researchers in this area, investigating stories and reports and doing their thing. I'm looking forward to future reports from this area to add to, not just my personal database, but the as far as patterns and whatnot to be included. Exciting stuff, and I really thank you for joining us tonight and sharing, sharing your reports and encounters. You seem like you put yourself in the right place at the right time, even if you don't necessarily mean to, because you don't claim to be a researcher or anything. You happen to be out there. I think that's also a key point. It's just you're out there.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think, Jeffrey, that I'm going to take you up on that offer of coming out to see you guys.
Just like I said, give me a call, let me know.
Yeah, sounds very interesting. I think I could spend a few days out there.
In some of the areas, I think it would behoove you to put up a camera or a recorder sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Well, I appreciate you calling in for us, Jeffrey.
Not a problem, Julie.
All right.
Hey, Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to leave you now and jump to our next guest. But once again, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right,
and happy
have a good night. Okay.
Yes, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, what a a plethora of sightings and somewhat information-wise that he shared on the show. Fascinating stuff. Makes me even that much more interested in the state of Pennsylvania.
Oh yes. I'd like to talk to him in depth some more, down the road.
Yeah. Be a good show down the road to research the state of Pennsylvania and get other researchers and eyewitnesses from the state of Pennsylvania to kind of back up what he's, especially in that specific area. That'd be fascinating. So, well, we are going to jump right to our next guest, in Bobby Reich. I'm going to bring him on, and Bobby, are you there, Bobby?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, did I pronounce your last name right?
Nope, it's Rich.
Nope, I apologize.
Rich.
I was Rich. Okay, I apologize. I hate pronouncing last names wrong, so I apologize for that.
No problem. It's done all the time.
But however, thank you for joining us. We had a great guest on sharing his encounters, and you are another fascinating person in the fact that you've had multiple encounters, and we're talking about a completely different side of the country, which is awesome. And I know, Bobby, that you're an admin. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're up to now, and then we'll get into your reports?
Background as far as what? Work or
Sasquatch. Just your background with the subject of Sasquatch. Gunnar always likes to start a show talking and asking a guest what their background and familiarity is with Sasquatch. What's your background with that?
The only thing I was familiar with was back when I was 5 or 6 year old. They were doing a double feature of Planet of the Apes at one of the movie theaters, and all the neighborhood kids went. We went, and they showed the Patterson-Gimlin film in between an intermission, and that was the first thing I was aware of, and then the In Search Of movies with Leonard Nimoy, and then that was it until I had my first sighting when I was 12 in 76.
In 76. Okay, so...
Yeah, but I'm a hunter
ever
since. I got my first gun when I was 5 years old and collected them ever since with hunter and been out in the woods since I was a little bitty.
Awesome. So let's get into your first encounter, what you were doing, the general area that you were in, and how everything played out, how everything came to be.
Okay, it was the weekend after the 4th of July in 1976. I was up above Strawberry Strawberry, California, up above Sonora, in an area called Eagle Meadows. It's roughly where the Sierra Sounds were recorded. We were camping. There were my family and then 2 other families there. My parents and sister stayed in a motorhome. I was in a tent with my puppy, and then there were 2 other campers. We were in like a U shape, and I was at the end of the U up against a big pine tree in my tent. And it was either a full moon or near a full moon that night, and it was I had no watch with me, so I'm guessing somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning. I heard this crunching sound coming off of a hill down to the road, and where we were camping, they paved the dirt roads with ground up lava rock, and so you could hear crunching, and it was bipedal steps. You could hear it crunching down across the road and across part of our camping area, and then it went down to the creek, and as it was walking on the river rocks, you could hear them shifting under the weight, and then it sounded like it picked up 2 rocks, and it would hit them together and set to 3. It did it click, click, click. It did it like 3 or 4 times, and then it either put them down or carried them, I don't know, but when it did that, it
started walking towards my tent, you could hear the river rock shifting again, and then I got onto the crunchy gravel where we were in the dirt. You could hear the stomp, stomp, stomp. It was getting closer and closer to my tent, and I was panicked. I was just frozen in fear. My pup was sound asleep, didn't even notice anything. And then it crossed. The back of my tent was where the moon was shining on, and it crossed right with probably within 10 feet of my tent. And you could see the shadow of it from like the shoulders down, and you could tell it had kind of long, messed up hair on the body portion. And when it first showed its shadow and got part way in, I screamed. It had to have shot straight out because it no longer went across my tent. And my dad came out with his gun and saw the picnic table, almost shot it thinking it was a bear. But I made him check that there was nothing out there, and then I ran into the motorhome and stayed there the rest of the night. We left the next day. There were no prints. There's no way you could have found any prints on that lava rock. But there was nothing there, and they were all telling me, no, it's a bear. It was a bear. You heard it crunching or a deer pounding its hooves on the rocks. No, it was not. I've seen it walk behind my tent.
Yeah. And how tall do you think it was?
I'm guessing that one's probably 7 or 8 feet tall to cast a shadow. It depends on where the moon was actually at, but I'm guessing 7 to 8 feet tall from seeing it from only the shoulders down. So that was number one. And you ready for the rest?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with this first encounter, I mean, was there any smell associated? What was the weather like? I mean, do you know what elevation you were at, possibly?
It's roughly 6,000 feet in elevation. It was a clear summer night. It was in we figured out it was, I think, the 11th or 12th of July. It was a weekend, and it was the last day we were there, so it would have been early Saturday night, Sunday morning, right in there, because we left the next day. So.
And for the viewership, the listening audience, what was the terrain like out there? I mean, what's in this area? You got water. I mean, what were you guys doing out there? I mean, you got camping, of course, but. Yeah,
we were just camping. That was it. Oh yeah, and there were no smells associated with any of my encounters. But we were just out there camping. We were right next to a creek. My tent was probably 50 feet from it, and the terrain is mountainous. There's a few kind of tall mountains, but there's no huge tight peaks there around that area. It's just mountains, pine trees, willows around the creeks, manzanita. You guys probably not familiar with that. Buckbrush.
Yeah.
Skunk cabbage. Just general mountain type stuff.
Pretty bright night as far as moon phase.
Yeah, it was a totally clear night.
Yeah.
So I got a good view of it, of the shadow crossing my tent. Very defined. I could see.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences, and so I know you're kind of retelling some of my experiences. But so first encounter, obviously nothing absolute definitive as far as whatnot. But so you had other encounters. What was your next encounter?
Okay, all the rest of my next encounters, including my dad's, are about 30 miles northwest of Susanville, California. We've been deer hunting there since I was a baby. We would go 2 weeks for archery and a week for rifle. So we were up there quite an extended period during hunting season. And we have a little tiny zone, so nobody else liked to get that zone because in that zone you had to have a 3-point or better. And we count the points different than you guys do elsewhere. You cannot count the eye guards, and you can only count the points on one side. So it has to have at least 3 points, not including the eye guard, on one side. So nobody liked to hunt that zone. Everything else was 2 points. And this zone was a tiny zone. Nobody hunted that but us. And my second encounter was roughly 77, 78, somewhere right in there. And what we were doing is the half of the people would go up on top of a hill. The rest would go down on a lower road and spread out. And the people up above would walk down and drive the deer down to the people below. Well, I was walking down from the top going down. I walked through some normal big growth forest, nothing. I walked through some tall manzanita. It's thick brush, and it gets 8, 12 feet high. And I cleared through that, and I got to this spooky area. I hated that spot. It was a old clear cut where they had replanted it, and they didn't thin the trees out. So the trees are like 4 or 5 feet apart, and they're probably 25 feet high. So it was, everything inside of it was dead, and it was so dark. It was a dense, dark forest. So I cleared the manzanita, and I got to that, and I was walking into it probably 30, 35 yards, I'm guessing. And all of a sudden, I heard the Tasmanian devil behind me. I turned around, and I looked, and you couldn't see it. I was walking from north to south, and it was walking from west to east. But you could hear it. You couldn't hear the walking, the steps, but you could hear the noise. And it until it kept walking by until it went out of range. It was inside the manzanita. And I always thought, it stuck in my mind because it was just so odd. We're 26 miles from civilization on top of a hill. There's nobody else that hunts this zone but us, and there would be nobody up there to do it. And I know there was no animals that could do that. And it didn't even cross my mind until, later, recently, where I was listening to tapes and heard that same exact noise. I wasn't really frightened. It was just odd. It was just odd.
Where have you heard that sound before? Is there a particular, was it anything from the Sierra sounds? Or?
Yeah, the Sierra sounds and a couple others. Where it was like that, where it's going like the Tasmanian devil. That's
wow. Have you heard anything like that since?
No, never since.
Never.
The only thing I can think of now is that it was probably 10 o'clock in the morning when we were doing this. The only thing I can think of is they supposedly like to go up high to sleep, and I woke it up, and it was bad, and it was letting me know it. That was what I'm thinking, and that's the same thing for my third encounter.
Wow.
Any questions on this one?
Well, yeah, no, I agree with you that, and I know nothing, but I will say that, if I look at what's known, especially with cats and stuff, high ground is always the best ground. So a high vantage point, you can see everything, you're protected, and usually you can get a fast getaway, too. If something that is approaching you, you feel threatened, you can get away real quick. But the high point for most animals, most of the trail camera pictures that we get on the ridges, are hunting animals, and so you're talking about a high vantage point, and also away from people. You're not talking about low areas, so it stands to reason that a Sasquatch would utilize these high areas for taking a nap or hunting or traveling. It just that to me stands out and stands to reason.
Yeah, and
right.
You got to consider one other thing too, that in my mind there are no Bigfoots that are up there at all. In my mind, so I was not leery of them.
I mean, you're in an area where there's bear and everything else, obviously. That area has bear and cougar and the whole
whole
bear,
nine. Cougar, bobcat, antelope, deer, coyotes, badgers. My grandma actually saw a wolverine there about that time period too. Nobody's ever seen it since.
Yeah, I was going. Well, Wolverine, regardless, in Northern California, is rare. I mean, rare, very rare. You know, I've been up here in Oregon. There's porcupine up here. I've never seen a porcupine, but they're here. I get reports.
Yeah, we have those.
I know people have seen them. You know, and so it's just that rare. But also, you know, they know how to stay hidden. But they're here. I just haven't seen one.
Yeah, I always collect stickers from them. Get a stick and scrape some off. Take the souvenirs when I find them. They don't run very fast. Yeah, heck yeah. So just real quick with this particular encounter, your impression was that maybe you had woken it up, or you were, you guys had placed yourself in an area where you stirred something, and were you guys being loud? I mean, what were you doing? We're walking down from the top of the hill down to scare deer down to the people down below. That's what we were doing. So we were making noise as we were going down.
Yeah.
To spook them.
Yeah, spook them. Right.
So.
Well, you spooked something else apparently.
I'm pretty sure I woke it up, and it was just letting me know that I wasn't happy.
Mm-hmm. Or you came across an area where it didn't want you, or wasn't happy that you were there, whether it was sleeping or not.
Yeah, I think it was sleeping though, because it was they would be up all night hunting, and that would seem to be at sleeping time. Because from my other experiences and hearing other people's reports, I seem to just wake up and people start seeing them around 3:00 in the afternoon. That seems to be the most time encountered of them again in the daytime.
Well, yeah. Once again, like our last guest, this is another area with percentage-wise, with a lot of reports and encounters. I mean,
there's a lot of encounters up in that area that I've dug up. Even somebody, and my dad's encounter. When I get to that story, somebody seen it a few years. The same one. It had to be the same one. It was the same spot. It was the same color. My dad seen it was like 6 feet high, and this guy seen it a few years later. It was 8 feet high.
Well, we'll definitely get to that for sure. That sounds, predictability and patterns, and another visualization in the same general area. Awesome. So, what other encounters have you had?
Well, I'll mention that the one the Tasmanian sounding one, this story that I just told, was probably a quarter mile to a half a mile from our camp as the crow flies. But my third encounter was a little further away. It was probably 3 to 5 miles as the crow flies. And I think it's a totally different group from the one that's right by our camp. The third encounter, we were doing the same thing. It was probably 79, 80. And again, I was at the top of the hill walking down, and I can remember my uncle was one of the ones walking down too. I remember that because he was in the next clearing over from me. Walked through some heavy, dense, tall forest, the older growth stuff, and I walked into this clear cut, and separating me and my uncle, there was probably a 20-foot group wide of, or 20-yard wide group of trees that they didn't take down. And I was walking on the other side away from him along the tree line, and I got a ways down into this clearing, and all of a sudden this growl that could not, I got to mention there were manzanita growing where the old growth stopped and the clear cut. So I had to walk through a grove of manzanita to get into the clear cut. So anyway, this growl, I mean, it was the deepest vibrating growl that you can imagine. There's no way a person, a bear, or anything like that could do that. And I whipped around, and I'm looking, scanning the manzanita, looking for something that's growling at me, sneaking up on me, and there was nothing there. So I walked to the center of the clearing away from the trees. So I'd be on the open, and then I saw my uncle in the other clearing, so I felt a little more relieved, and I went on down. And the growl vibrated my body, and it was so low, the tone of it, that there's nothing that I knew of that could make that, not even a bear, to do that growl. And that was number 3.
Yeah, I mean, see, that's one of the more interesting things with some reports is that for those that have, hunters specifically that have experienced bear sounds and whatnot, it's these sounds that come out that you can feel, that reverberate through your body, that are from something large, obviously. Those always stand out to me, and especially during an encounter or a sighting. The pure gutturalness of some of these vocals are just crazy.
Yeah,
as you're describing.
This was something else. Yeah, it was nothing. It was nothing like a bear. I hunt bear. I was within a few feet of a bear that was growling at me, and it was nothing like it.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of people mention infrasound, along with your reports. I mean, did you experience anything like that, or was it just, this pure sound, this guttural whatever? I mean, is that what you experienced? Did you feel funny or anything, or just like, whoa?
No, I could feel it in my body when it did it. So it was either the low tone of it, or it had the infrasound in with it. One of the two, or both. But I felt it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's one of those things where you don't forget it because you felt it.
No.
You felt through your body. You never forget that. I mean, it sticks with you.
Yeah, it did. It did.
Yeah.
Number 4 was my worst experience. We had already been up hunting for the 2 weeks, and we wanted to come again. 3 of us wanted to come up again for the last weekend of archery season. So during the deer hunting, I didn't have a vehicle. I rode up with somebody, so I didn't have a vehicle to go around and sit at tree stands or anything. So I found one. It was an old abandoned one, sitting right off the road, right next to a pond where they had deer come and watered or drank. So we brought up 3 oars the next trip, and first night were the 3 days. The first night evening I went there for the evening sit. I got pictures of does and fawns coming and drinking, and no bucks came in. The second day driving up there, just before I got to my stand, buck breast, they have these large thorns, rammed into my pinky knuckle and sunk in. So I went ahead and got up my tree stand, and I tried to cut it out, and I couldn't do it. And so I tried to line up the puncture hole with the needle or the thorn that was in my knuckle, and try to push it out. Well, I ended up pushing it deeper into my knuckle, so I had to get back down, go into camp, wait for them to get back, go to the hospital. They had to surgically remove it, and so now my pinky's in a sling sticking out. So 3rd day to the stand, last day there, I parked the 3-oar about 100 yards down the road so I can see it from my stand so nobody swipes it or anything. Walked to my stand. Before I get up there, I decided, I'm going to relieve myself, so I walked back in about 35 yards behind the stand where I didn't think any deer would come from, because it went back in there a ways, and then it dropped down at a 45-degree angle down to a lake way down below. So I did my business, walked back to the tree stand, got up in it, and just as I was turning to sit down, a roar that shook me to my bones, to my core, man. let out, and I was in the midst of sitting down. I sat down, and I'm frozen. You know, my whole body's vibrating from this roar. It's lasting like 5-10 seconds long. Just noise intensity. The only way I can describe it is a lion roar, but with a T-Rex's intensity, like we see in the Jurassic Park, how they just do that. And so I slowly turned over my left shoulder and to look, and my tree stand sits like 5 feet off the road, and then the road is probably 20, 25 feet wide, and all I can see is the far side of the road. I can't see anything standing there, but it was probably another 10, 15 feet just outside of my view, but I'm sure it could see the lower portion of my body in the tree. It was just roaring so loud. Oh, my God, it was horrifying. And then he got dead quiet. It's not approaching me. It's not walking away. Nothing's happening. I'm sitting there watching that spot. And in front of the tree stand is the pond. It's directly beneath me. And it's probably 20, 25 feet in length and maybe 15 feet wide. And it's set at the edge of a clear cut. And it went like 100 yards deep, and then it went up a small hill and more beyond that, and it's probably, I don't know, 60, 80 yards wide, and I sat in one corner of it, and probably 15 minutes passed, and all of a sudden that roar was again, and it was in front of me to my left at the corner of the clear cut into this in the deep wood still just before it went up the hill. So my attention goes there. I'm thinking it's the same thing roaring at me. And I'm not thinking Bigfoot. I'm thinking there's no Bigfoots up there in my mind. And so I'm watching this spot, and I could, in my peripheral vision, I can see my three-wheeler and the road. And I'm sitting there watching this last spot where it roared, and all of a sudden, in my peripheral vision, I see something tall and black step off the road into the woods, heading towards the second sound. So now I know there's two somethings out there.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm petrified. I didn't feel any of the vibrating stuff on the second roar. It just did it. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, it's about 3:30 in the afternoon right now, and it's going to get dark soon. And I'm not going to be in the tree stand when it gets dark. So I waited about 1 hour. There's still no sound. There's no wildlife movement, no trees, birds in my tree anymore, no squirrels, no chipmunks, no nothing, just dead silent. So I waited like the hour, and then I just booked it out of that tree, and I ran for my three-wheeler. I didn't even look into the woods to see if anything was following me, and I got out of there. That was number 4.
Well, so during this encounter, I mean, where were the irregularities that were standing out to you? I mean, you probably obviously hunted this area. You've hunted this area before, obviously.
Yes.
What was you mentioned the quietness, nothing going on out there. Was that cause for alarm for you?
Yeah, because it's not quiet. There's always those stupid little chickadees in your tree that are squawking that you're there in their territory. They're constant. And the little chipmunks and squirrels, and when they see you or if they see you move, then they'll do their alarm. There was nothing. They weren't even around. They were gone this whole time.
Yeah, so to hear this penetrating roar, coming from nothing, that would frighten most people, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was my worst experience. And it was standing there. It was just out of my sight. It was probably within, say, 25, 30, probably 40 feet from me, 35, 40 feet from me, standing there, and I couldn't see it. And I know it could see me, the bottom portion of my body.
Mm.
So this area, we're talking about multiple possible encounters. So is this area in close proximity to the other encounters?
It's close to the growl.
Close to the growl, okay.
Hill where I heard the growl is probably a mile away from it.
Oh, yeah, that's nothing. That's
Just
nothing.
to the north.
Right. The one of the things that I've heard you mention a few times, and our last guest mentioned, was manzanita. Can you describe manzanita for our audience? You know, we got people around the country listening that don't know what the heck manzanita is. I do. I'm from Southern California. I know manzanita well, and I've traveled all around California. Can you describe manzanita, the plant?
It's an unusual plant. It has shiny, rustish, brownish bark that's smooth. It'll grow to 8 to 12 feet high. It has oval-shaped leaves about the size of a walnut, and they're kind of greenish-gray, really thick, and then it gets red berries on top that animals like to eat.
Yeah.
And really dense, too.
Yeah, really dense, and really, it's really hard wood. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, extremely hard wood.
Yeah.
It's very expensive, too. People use it for decoration and stuff.
Yeah, it's an amazing and very attractive looking bush tree. You know, I mean, reason I bring that up is because up here in the Pacific Northwest specifically, some of the possible evidence we've uncovered and discovered, and many of the reports revolve around huckleberry bushes, also very thick and hard wood. But there are, to me, patterns there, and you know, our guest from Pennsylvania, our past guest last hour, mentioned manzanita, and you've mentioned it, and so I just bring that to the forefront as you know some of these encounters and reports come as far as patterns and possible predictability around manzanita, as we're in the Pacific Northwest, we got a lot of huckleberry, especially up high country, where you get a lot of reports and stuff, and interesting things happen. So I just had to talk about that. Yeah.
Great place for them to hide in. They can hide easily behind it. They can peek over it, peek through it. It's got berries. There's tons of it around.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I find that really freaking interesting personally. I hope the audience does, but I find that really interesting. And if anybody is somewhat of an investigator or likes this subject, just put that in your notebook. When taking in these reports and listening to people and whatnot, I think it's important because just as a hunter would look for certain things when they're hunting deer and whatnot, not that we're hunting Bigfoot, but look for these patterns in areas where this stuff grows that may be of interest to you. So just throwing that out there. But so that was your fourth encounter, correct? So what else has gone on with Bobby in these areas? I mean, pretty fascinating stuff in this NorCal area.
Yeah, the one thing I might mention, all my encounters, my second through the fifth, and my dad's, were all during August during archery season. Mm-hmm. All of them were at that time frame.
Yeah, so you got two things going on there. You got hunting season, but you also have people out in these areas, which August, for me personally, is, and once again for obvious reasons, a time of year where you get a lot of reports, August through December. Yeah. But, you got the warmer time of year, and people are out hunting. There's more people camping and doing things. Obviously, if Sasquatch is out there and they're going to show themselves or be seen, it's going to be during those months. But to me, there's much more going on there. Do you agree, Bobby?
Yeah, and I also want to mention that third encounter was again when I was coming off the top of a hill, walking down, making noise, and it was also again about 10 a.m. So I probably disturbed that one too.
Well, yeah, and as far as the time frame for reports, that's a little bit out of the, a lot of people report early a.m. or late night. So the 10 a.m., and I've gotten those reports, and I've had odd stuff happen to myself, being in areas where I'm making a ruckus or stirring up stuff. So once again, kind of stands to reason, but also out of your norm for reports, not necessarily for hunters, though. That's something to realize. Yeah.
Yeah, we were always out there going through the woods, and like I mentioned before, we were the only ones that hunted in that zone because it was so small. There were no other hunters in there. And during this time that we're sighting, or after my second encounter, they changed the rules for hunting. You had to choose either archery or rifle. And so we always chose archery. So we were in there during August we're out actually deep in the woods, beating the bushes, pushing things out off the top of hills to lower things. So we were out there doing that in groups.
Right.
So I'm
so you were spread out.
I'm very sure that these things were knew us or recognized us, because, like I said, since I was a baby, we've been going there. All my family, it's like a family reunion type thing out there in the campground. So we've been out there my grandparents started some 70-some years ago. So I'm very sure they were familiar with knew our faces and just didn't bother us, always walked in the other direction until the fourth encounter when I marked the territory, and I'm pretty sure it was standing there watching me, or TV droving up. Two of them might have been hunting at that pond at that time, or my ATV attracted them when I came in, and they were coming in to see what I was doing, and either saw me peeing in the woods or just was sneaking up on me after I was getting in my tree and passed the spot and smelled it or something, but they let me know about it.
Yeah, but for the non-hunters out there, I mean, what you guys were doing was trying to, you had guys on the bottom, or I don't know how many was in your group, but you're trying to bring something down and bring it to a point where something could be shot, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, you guys were probably spaced apart, hiking down, so
correct.
It's
probably 50 yards apart.
Yeah.
In groups like five up top and 5 or 6 down below is how we did it.
Yeah, and so you're covering quite a little bit of terrain there in this area.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I find that, really fascinating, and hunters utilize this method quite frequently, to especially some, when you've already got your for hunters, when you've already got your kill, your quota or whatever, you may not partake in actually shooting something, but you will partake in drawing something to a point where another hunter can have an opportunity.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. So now, how many more encounters have you had in still
one more.
This general area?
Yeah, same spot. My last one was from the growl to the tree stand one. I got to mention my tree stand was August of 81. I was a junior in high school. Like I said, they were probably as crow flies about a mile apart, and the growl was like mostly north of the tree stand. In 1982, my last sighting was 1 mile down the road from the tree stand, and probably half to 3/4 of a mile from the growl point, so like a small triangle right there. And for my fifth encounter, we were driving down the side of the mountain. They had a 1-lane road or trucking road for logging road, and it was cut to the side of the mountain. This mountain was like on a 45-degree angle, heading down to the lake below, and it was overgrown. On my sister's side of the truck, we were driving south. She was looking uphill. There was like a 6-foot bank, and then the manzanita started above that. I was looking downhill, and I had manzanita and small trees 15 or so feet high, going back from the old burn. And I was on the driver's side looking down in the back of the truck. My bow and her bow are on the cab, so we're leaning up against the cab. I'm looking down, and we were coming to a old growth portion that the fire had damaged, and it had limbs hanging over the road, and if you don't duck, you get swiped off the truck. So probably 30, 35 yards before we got there, I glanced over to see how much time I had before I had to duck, and my eyes caught a Bigfoot staring at me. He was about 10 feet off the road, standing up against the tall road, but behind a tree. It was about a 15-foot tall tree. He had the top of it pulled over, and he was looking at me. I saw his whole face, except for he had a limb coming across his lips, so I couldn't see his lips. I could see his left shoulder. And my eyes locked on him. He was in shock. I was in shock. He had his head like it was tipped, like he had tipped it back. He had a rounded head. He didn't have a cone. He had big black eyes that were like they were wide open in shock. And I could see big nostril holes for his nose. And I glanced away from him and looked back down home. When I looked back, he had let loose of the limb. And I thought something like a baby had jumped off of it and was running downhill because I got the tree he had pulled over. There was another one about 10 feet away, and I saw down on all fours, I saw from like the elbow back and the knees forward, jet black. This thing was jet black, and he had gorilla-colored skin, and I seen a silver back on it. I always thought it was a baby one jumping off, but I know it's not anymore. It was that thing going from standing up to all fours to get away. And by this time that it's on all fours, I'm about 20 yards away from it. And I back up against my sister and just looking at that spot where it was standing as we approached it. And when we got there, there was like a 10-foot clearing gap between that tree and the old growth stuff, and it went down probably 30 yards and to Manzanita, and he was already gone out of sight. That's when I knew they were there. So
wow, I don't think I've had anybody tell me that before, that they saw one actually running away on all fours. That is crazy.
Yeah,
but this, I'm sure that there is one group right there. It was like within 3 to 4 years apart, and the fourth and fifth counter were 1 year apart, and the growl was like a year or two before that. I'm sure it was the same creature that I saw in my fourth encounter, getting the glimpse of it stepping off the road into the woods, because it was tall and black. I'm sure it was the same one.
Jeez.
That was my last encounter. I did not, after that, I don't sit on tree stands anymore. I don't go out in the woods alone anymore. There's always somebody with me or within sight of me.
Right. I mean, so your last encounter, I mean, we're talking about 1982. Why have you not experienced anything since? Is it because of what you just stated right now?
Well, I went to college for 4 years out of state and didn't hunt anymore. Then I got married and lived out of state for about 10 years, and then just only recently started going back. So, but right now I have a brain tumor and I cannot get out and walk and beat the bushes anymore. So.
Wow. I mean,
but I can hunt. I can hunt from the truck and walk and look for stuff, but I can't get out and walk out in the woods, and I won't sit in a tree stand by myself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you have any kind of odor with this stuff at all when you
None of
were
my
that close to it?
None of them. I don't know if it was they just didn't do it or the wind was blowing the wrong direction, but I have never had the odor. And then my dad's encounter was either the year or the year after my first encounter. His was right by camp, within probably half a mile to a mile as a crow flies from camp. And my what's it called? Tasmanian Devil Sound was in between those two spots. Him and my grandfather were coming back from town with groceries, and again, it was like 3:30 in the afternoon, and all of a sudden he hit his brakes and look, he thought he saw a deer, and he described it as like the Patterson-Gimlin film, except it was going the opposite direction. It walked just like it, and it also turned it over its shoulder and looked back at him, and then walked off. But his was the same color as deer, kind of that buff brown color, and he said it was like 6.5 feet tall. And they went back the next day and checked, and there were no tracks. There's no way you're going to find any tracks up there because it's all small lava rock type stuff. The only way would be if one had stepped in the powder along the dirt road, the logging roads. That's the only way you're going to be able to find a track there or around one of the ponds. But there are no creeks there that come off of snowpack. All the snow goes into the ground, and you have natural springs that are popped up everywhere. And on my fifth encounter, about 50 yards back from where I saw that thing staring at me, on my sister's side, like I said, there's a bank there, probably 3 feet up from the edge of the bank. There was a water hose fountain coming up out of the ground. It was just the same amount around as a water faucet hose. If you turned it on full blast, it's squirting up 12 inches and was kind of arched over. But it did not run back off the hill. It was going straight back into the ground. I think that one was going back or was walking over to get a drink from that spring is what I think. But also in my dad's encounter, he said when it turned and looked back at him, he scared him. And then reading reports, there's a report, if you go on YouTube, Pittsville Road, Susanville, California, there's a encounter that's almost word for word of my dad's. It's the exact same spot, 1 mile from camp. You saw it a few years later, same color, except for it was around 8 feet tall. Did the same exact thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty sure there are 2 separate groups right there. The black ones.
So Bobby, I got to ask you. So, having had these multiple encounters and sightings, what sticks out in your head? Why you and what were you? I mean, being out there, obviously, as our last guest pointed out, is being out in the woods, getting these encounters and sightings. But is there anything that sticks out in your head as a pattern or something you were doing that made you more prone to have these encounters?
I think it's the time of the day and what we were doing. Because 2 of the encounters, we were actually on top of the hill, and I think they were up there sleeping. It was mid-morning, and we were driving down, making noise to disturb things to make them come out of hiding to drive down to the people down below. That, I think they're sleeping on the top of the hills in the mornings. I think they're waking up around 3 o'clock in the afternoon to come out, get drinks. That's the second time of the day when people start seeing them the most, is around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But the morning ones, we were deliberately on top of the hill driving, making noise to stir up animals. So that's the pattern that I see there.
So do you think Sasquatch is a nocturnal entity?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Many of the reports reflect that. I tend to agree that a lot of their activity is at night, as a lot of predators are, and I find Sasquatch to be, like many animals, capable of being nocturnal and diurnal. I mean, just stands to reason. But I'm all about patterns and predictability, so I had to ask that question.
Yeah, I've never heard any other odd noises like the screams that some people record. I've never heard any of that there. I have heard wood knocks, but I've always considered it as part of natural being in the woods. Just every so often you hear a knock, because I never associated a Bigfoot. Didn't know they did that. so it was just natural part of being in the woods. I just lost my train of thought. I had something else to tell you about that.
That's fine. That's fine. Your encounters have been very intriguing, to say the least. And given the known area, which you have stated before, California has an absolute ton of reports, specifically Northern California. Mm-hmm. Oregon's got a lot. Washington's got a lot. British Columbia's got a lot. Ohio does. And so for me, it's about piecing together what's going on out there with these reports, encounters, and finding similarities. I know, Bobby, you are kind of a student of the subject. You've been, since your encounters and whatnot. You mentioned your brain tumor, and I'm sorry to hear that you can't get out and do the things that you probably would love to do. But I know that you're still, based on what you've experienced, a student of the subject, like many of us, and are as interested as us on it. Anything you'd like to share? Any thoughts or ideas as to what Sasquatch may be, and why it's in these areas at given times of year, like August and whatnot?
For being in that area that time of year, I think that is their hunting grounds. It's stocked with bears, it's stocked with cougars, coyotes, badgers, antelope, deer, all sorts of prime food. They have natural springs all over the place to drink from, and berries. There's gooseberries, and they have the mandarina berries. Just tons of food, everything they need. They have hills they can go up on, sleep. I even found right by camp, right where I had the Tasmanian Sound, I found a ambush shelter up there, right off of where 2 or 3 big main deer trails were. Everything they want is right there in that spot, but they cannot stay there over winter. And it's about 6,000 feet high, and unless they hibernate, the snowpack sometimes gets 15, 20 foot high. There's no way they can walk in it. There's no way they can get food in it. So they have to migrate to lower elevations. That's
yes. I think people get really hung up on the word migration. They think migration, okay, you got to travel huge distances. When in fact migration, because black bears specifically in the Northwest, they don't truly hibernate. They take naps, and they go from lower to higher elevation, just like your deer and elk. So migration, for me, and I think for science in general, doesn't necessarily mean hundreds and hundreds of miles. It means from elevation to elevation to get to that food source. If you got snow in one area and there's a lack of food, well, you follow that down to the lower elevations during the times of the season and get that food. Migration is just from one point A to point B, and not necessarily hundreds of miles. It could be miles.
Yeah, like I said, these last encounters up deer hunting, they're at about 6,000 foot elevation. The last 3 encounters are on that one hill that I said that drops at a 45-degree angle down to a lake that's about 2,000 feet lower in elevation, and it doesn't get near as much snow. It's about the same elevation as Susanville. They don't get much snow. It doesn't stick on the ground for very long when it does snow. And there's a huge lake and stuff down there. I'm sure they grounds through. There's a resort down there. They can eat their garbage and. But I know these ones migrate off the hill down to lower elevation. Some might even take a different route and head down towards Chico or something like that. But that's no longer destination. But if they go out in those plains, and I know they have tons of sightings in Nevada, because the area that I'm at, the mountain range dumps off into the Nevada wilderness, which is like desolate desert-looking stuff with hills that they could avoid the harshness of the winters.
Yeah, it's very simple. Look at there's a multitude of sites out there. Look at the reports during the time of year, and then you can get a better picture of what's going on during certain times of year, and you will see, because I've done this, you will see patterns there where something, the reports are at a high elevation during certain times of year and a lower elevation during other times of year. I mean, you don't even have to look at Sasquatch reports. Look at animal life, deer and elk and bear and everything else. The same report. We're talking about the pyramid effect, and so just look at those reports. Look at what your known animals out there, and you will get a better picture of possibly what Sasquatch are doing.
Yeah, I also might mention that I have cousins that live up there where we deer hunt. And I talked to one of them and told him about my encounters and asked him if he's seen anything or experienced anything weird out there. And he let on like he's had several experiences out there, but he doesn't want to talk about them. And doing my research, I've seen within about a 15-mile radius around where we camp, there are multiple sightings by many people in that one area.
Yeah.
Really need to have like some sort of, but somebody who can actually get out in the field and do stuff up there, scanning the area.
Yeah. Well, Bobby, please stay in touch, and we really thank you for joining us tonight. We got a couple minutes here.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experiences.
Bobby.
You're welcome, and
Bobby,
happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Thank you so much.
Yes, happy Easter, Bobby.
I'm gonna let you go, but thank you, Bobby, once again for joining us.
Okay, thanks for having me on.
All right,
have
talk to you later,
night.
Bobby.
You'll have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, for the viewers' listenership, these guys join our shows, these people with encounters, they don't get anything out of it other than to share their experience. There's no real fame here. So take it, the tidbits you can learn, you can discount them or not, but there's something to be learned, I think, from many of these reports, and I enjoy listening to them, and I get as much out of it as some of the audience does, I hope. Having said that, next weekend, we have Cliff Barrickman on the show from Finding Bigfoot. He's a good friend of mine and a fellow researcher. He's been doing this research for a number of years, and he's going to be on the show next week, so please tune in. Julie, any final thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think it's fascinating that Hunter, on each side of the country are having very similar experiences, so, it does seem to kind of confirm off of each other what their experiences are.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and that's the point of Monster Radio. We want to share these experience encounters and avoid all the skullduggery out there and just share the innocence of these reports, and people can enjoy them, I hope, like I do. But anyways, thank you, Julie, for joining me tonight and being my co-host. Thank you for our guests. We hope you guys tune in next week for another fantastic show. Cliff Barrickman, who's going to share a bunch of really cool stuff, and a fantastic guest, well-known person in the Bigfoot world. We hope to share Cliff and get to know Cliff a little more personally. So we will sign off now. Yes, we're going to sign off now. Thank you, Julie. Everybody have a great
thanks for having
week.
me.